All right. Hello and welcome to another edition of HPFC Interview Series. Today we have a real pleasure of having Coach Gaspar here with us. I don't think he needs any introduction. I mean, anybody who knows football and knows the Portuguese national team, FC Porto, Benfica, and the Iranian national team is very well familiar with Coach. And for me, as I told him earlier, it's a real honor and a pleasure to have him here. So, Coach, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Mo, it's my pleasure, my honor to have this opportunity to speak with you and to your listeners. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, Coach, as I mentioned to you earlier, the purpose of this interview is the theme is success leaves clues. And for our audience, as I told you, players, coaches, and parents who are mostly in North America, I wanted to discuss your path with you as you went through your journey, and perhaps highlight those things that made you successful in your career, and those people that you met, for example, Ronaldo and Coach Quiroz and all the great players from Portugal and Iran that you had an experience with. What made them special? So the journey that we're going to discuss today is going to help other coaches hopefully going through theirs. And as I said, I mean, through the picture you could see here, Coach doesn't need any introductions. I mean, he's been at the top of the footballing world, and I wanted to kind of start right from the beginning, if that's okay with you. As I told you, that it reminds me of an old saying that it goes something like this: "Give me a boy for the first 7 years, and I'll tell you what kind of a man he'll be." And I'm very curious to learn about your earlier years, where you were born, family life, all that stuff, and then we'll go from there if you don't mind.
No worries. You're really forcing me to go to my files, my archives way back many years ago. But it's my pleasure to share my humble beginnings, and that's where they were, Mo. They were very humble. My parents were proud Portuguese immigrants who came to the United States, like so many other immigrants, in pursuit of the American dream. And there's a couple of key moments in my life early on that I believe has helped me make who I am today. First of all, my parents were extremely proud of their roots, their Portuguese heritage and culture. In fact, I stayed back in first or second grade because I knew more Portuguese than I did English. And as someone who was American born, I didn't want to be viewed as an immigrant. I wanted to be viewed as an American, but my parents insisted on that. And if it wasn't for that insistence, I would have never had the international career that I've experienced over so many years, because I was able to be bilingual. I was able to speak Portuguese fluent. So that gave me the opportunity to work with the Portuguese national team, Porto, Benfica, and Sporting. Secondly, my parents would send myself, my brother, and my sister to vacation every summer in Portugal. And kids my age were working so hard in the land, carrying bags of potatoes, driving trucks. And I'm like saying, hey, man, this isn't for me. But I only realized later that it was, and it was the initiation of me falling in love with the game. My grandmother, who had a home over 300 years old, had a patio behind her home where she used to, dry the corn and the vegetables and etc. But for us, that was our playing area. We called it the cage, and we cleared all those things in order to have a small space where we played 4v4, 5v4, 5v5. And, the team that won was able to go to the coffee shop and celebrate. The team that lost would be humiliated and embarrassed, and they go back to their homes and lock themselves in their bedroom. I was the last one picked every time when they went to select teams my first summer. But with my pride and my competitiveness, I would come back to the States and I would work on my skill set. Always my best friend, passing, receiving, turning, until I eventually reached skill level that I was no longer the last one picked. Middle of the table, sometimes top of the table. Sometimes I brought the winning ball back to me in my grandma's house. So I learned to fall in love with the game in that patio. I learned competitiveness. I learned about imagination, creativity. I learned tough love. The older players were not always so sweet and kind and positive reinforcement. So those early stages were very crucial in my development. And then as it progressed, my father, who was a former professional goalkeeper at Benfica and other teams, he taught me to fall in love with the art of goalkeeping. He was my best friend, my best mentor, my best goalkeeper coach. And he would start me off at Colts Park in the city of Hartford, where I was born, very diverse community, which also exposed me to the game. And in Colts Park, I remember one day, Mo, specifically, my dad, old school, had the bag of balls, put them at the penalty spot, striking balls at me. And that particular day, I let all the balls in. There were about 12 of them. He asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah. He goes, let's do this again. I said, sure. He gathered the balls, put them at the penalty spot, and he started volleying the balls at me again. Guess what happened? I let all the balls back in. He realized something was drastically wrong. And he asked me, what's wrong, son? And I said, Dad, and I paused to try to have the courage to say this to him, but I said, you can no longer score on me unless I want you to score on me. He said, really? He packed up all the balls, Mo, put them in his car, drove away, left me in a park, took me about an hour and a half to walk home. He never, never, never trained me again. Now, I was 15, 16 years old. I didn't realize it at the time, but in reflecting back, he was teaching me humility. He was teaching me the difference between confidence and arrogance. And at that moment, it was an arrogant attitude that I had. And that carried on throughout my life. Despite the career that I've had, the wonderful experiences I've been blessed and fortunate to have, I'm always trying to be humble and respectful and listen and try to get educated and to learn and grow from others. The last episode that I'm going to tell you is with my dad. It was at New London Beach. He first started me off in the beach training because, you know, goalkeepers are not born. They don't jump out of bed and start diving. You know, there's a progression. So the sand was a soft surface. So he would start serving balls to me and I would be flying. And again, back in those days, soccer was relatively new in the United States. And people started gathering, watching what was going on. I mean, they thought it was abuse. You know, they had no idea that it was the art of goalkeeping. I was flying, catching the ball. It was 90 degrees. Sand was stuck to my lips. I said, Daddy, could I have some water? No, you know, in those days you could do that. Today, forget about it. That's a huge liability issue. And the lifeguard would come, the beach police would come. They wanted to arrest my dad because they had no idea that this was part of the training process. So those are a few examples in the early stages of my life. Now I realize have impacted my growth.
Absolutely. You mentioned something that was interesting. At the time you were growing up, soccer was very new to North America. I think it wasn't until the late 60s, 70s where we started having a league there and players started coming over. What do you remember from the younger days when you were playing, let's say, 10, 12 to 15? What kind of football was there around?
Well, again, as a result of being born in America, I wanted to be an American. I didn't want to really be an immigrant, a foreigner. And my first passions, Mo, were basketball, baseball, and American football. I didn't start playing soccer until I was a sophomore in high school. So I started very late, although the game was in my family and in my Portuguese community. But I wasn't playing organized soccer at that time. And then when I realized that these American sports didn't fit me, were not suited to my athleticism, then I started to realize that soccer was my gateway. You know, my parents, who taught me so much about integrity, honest, keeping your commitment, discipline, making sacrifices to achieving your dreams. And I was the first sibling in my family to go to college. They couldn't financially support me. They supported me emotionally. So fortunate for me, once I decided to be a goalkeeper, I was able to secure an athletic scholarship to the University of Hartford, and that allowed me to be the first family member to earn a collegiate degree. So early on, it would be very community oriented, nothing really organized, until eventually I decided to make the transition from American sports to the global game, which is soccer.
So it's fair to say that it was once you went on to university where you started playing more seriously.
Yes, and well, high school, I started, around sophomore year where I decided not to play the American sports and decided to play soccer. And then I was very young. At the age of 16, I played for the Connecticut Soccer League. I played for the Hartford Portuguese soccer team. I played for Vasco da Gama, New Britain General Megula, and these were semi-professional leagues, very competitive. And I was one of the youngest to play in the league. And again, a learning experience. I remember the first Connecticut Soccer League game I played, I conceded 9 goals in one game. And, during training throughout my development, the quality players were, again, hard. You fell, they didn't come to pick you up. You had to pick yourself up. But I really realized when I conceded those 9 goals and I was crying in the locker room, how many of them came and embraced me and taught me that this was a process. These are things that that you need to experience in order to maximize your potential, to go through these pains, to go through these learning experiences. And I learned about the gift of failure. And what I mean by that is, anyone that's successful, regardless of whether it's athletics, professionally, personally, usually there's failure along the way. It's how we choose to deal with that, whether we succeed or continue to fail. And I chose to learn and grow from those experiences rather than letting those experiences beat me up.
Fully understand that. So where did your career take you? First of all, let me ask you, what was your relationship with academics with? Because I have a lot of young students who always wonder, do I have to be a good student to be a footballer, or do I have to sacrifice school to be a footballer? What was your relationship with school like?
If you could combine the both, great. For me personally, I was not a gifted academic student, but that didn't prevent me from being a good student. What I realized early on is that I had to study twice as hard than the rest to get the same grade. And that's what I did. I got up early, I studied, I went to the library, I studied, because I knew that's what I needed to do in order to compete in the classroom. And then I realized this: if I viewed the classroom as the locker room, if I view the students as my teammates, if I view the teacher or professor as my head coach, that made me much more comfortable in the classroom than if I just viewed it as an academic setting. And that's how I was able to survive.
I understand. So what happened subsequent to your university career? Did you go on to play more football afterwards, or did you end up going towards the
Yeah,
coaching path?
yes, I did. I was drafted by the Connecticut Yankees, which was a professional team here in the home state that I live in. At the time, I was playing for Vasco da Gama. I decided not to pursue the Connecticut Yankees, and I stayed with Vasco da Gama. It was a semi-professional team. In fact, we went to the U.S. Amateur Cup Finals, which is all the amateur teams in the country were competing for that. We played at giant stadiums, lost to the Maccabean teams. And oddly enough, my father was a coach of that team. And then years later, I coached the Hartford Portuguese soccer team and coached them to the finals in St. Louis. And again, we lost the finals. So it's kind of interesting how we both had the same career paths early on in my coaching career. Regarding playing in collegiate, I was selected for the All East Senior Bowl game, and we played against the West All-Stars. And that was a very proud moment for me because this was all the universities in the United States, and they selected, the top 11 or 12 or 14 players. I don't remember at the time. So that was a nice milestone as a player. But let me share my personal experience in terms of pursuing a professional career. My father, as I stated earlier, was a professional goalkeeper. His ambition, his dream, his aspiration was for me to be a professional goalkeeper. So he trained me on that pathway. But there was a time that I decided to take a brutal, honest inventory of exactly who I am and what I'm capable of doing, Mo. And I realized that despite working harder than anyone else, despite being more advanced technically and tactically than most of my competition, based on my stature, based on my athletic physics, I realized that I could potentially be an ASL or MSL number 3 goalkeeper. I could potentially be a second USL keeper. I could potentially be a number one in the third division. And none of those scenarios, Mo, would provide me for the lifestyle that I dreamed for my family. So at that moment in time, I decided to pursue the coaching career. At the University of Hartford, I was able to secure U.S. Soccer National C license. I was the youngest in the country to get acknowledged with a C license. And that really opened my mind. As a player, you think you know everything about the game, but until you go to these coaching courses, you realize how little you know, especially in the mythology and the structure. So once I accepted who I was, that gave me the freedom to make good decisions professionally for me. And I asked myself, what can I do to make a living that corresponds to my passion, which is the game of soccer, in particular, the art of goalkeeping. And then I decided to open up a soccer retail store. I decided to open up a goalkeeping camp. And from that arena, that created a platform to launch into the international level.
And that was where I wanted to lead to next is how did you end up making your way into Europe? Because I know you went back and forth a lot as a child and because of your family. And I'm sure, as you said, because your dad had lots of connections from his playing days. But how did you make that journey from a player in North America and a young coach in North America to now stepping over to the most serious environment in football?
That was a huge leap, especially for an American-born coach. Back in 92, 93, U.S. Soccer had a tournament called the U.S. Cup. And the teams that participated in that were Portugal, Italy, Ireland, and the U.S. Portugal was designated to play Italy at the Yale Bowl in New Haven, Connecticut. And U.S. Soccer contacted me and wanted to know if we would host a national team. And what did that mean? That meant me being the liaison between U.S. Soccer, the Portuguese national team, and the Portuguese club of Hartford. So I went to the Portuguese board members and asked them, would you like to host your national heroes? And they were extremely excited. And what did that mean? They created a banquet, which was a special evening for our community. We had to organize hotels, transportation, facilities, all the things that go into hosting a world-class team. Carlos Queiroz was the head coach at the time, and few people know this, Mo, but Coach Queiroz is a former goalkeeper. So we had something in common that bonded us together. And I asked him this question: if Portugal can produce superstars, world-class players like Eusebio, like Figo, like currently Cristiano Ronaldo, why can't we produce a world-class goalkeeper? And we both came to the conclusion it was because Portugal Federation didn't have a structure to develop elite goalkeepers. They didn't have a system. So without a professional system, you can't produce professional elite athletes. So then I became very persistent. And remember, this is the days of the faxes. This wasn't the internet days and social media and et cetera. So I began pursuing Coach Queiroz, and I said, please give me an opportunity to work with your best and I'll pay my way to Portugal. And he had the difficult challenge of convincing the Portuguese Federation, why on earth would we want an American coming and working with our professional goalkeepers? Well, he was able to convince them through power of persuasion. And I got on the plane. And my first opportunity was with the U17 Portuguese national team. Rui Caçador at the time came to me after a few days. He goes, you don't belong here. And I was concerned about that statement. He goes, you belong with the senior national team. The senior national team is training in Algarve, preparing for the Italy World Cup qualifier.
Okay.
So I went to the hotel, and it was like a scene out of The Godfather, Mo. There was a long table where all the coaches were sitting side by side and administrators. And then there was a single chair in this massive hall for me to sit in. Okay. So I go and I sit in the chair, and Coach Queiroz says, it's been brought to my attention that you want to work with our top goalkeepers here on the senior national team. Is that true? And I said calmly, yes, but my body was doing somersaults inside. So he whispered to his left, and they went all the way down the line. Then he whispered to his right. They went all the way down the line. And he says, okay, tomorrow morning, be here at 9:30. Training was scheduled at 10.